Until I was 24, I had never seen the ocean. When I first came to a coastal city to start uni, this was a fact that people found downright weird. This is Australia. Almost the entire population lives on the coast. It's just there the beach, the massive, fuck-off blue behemoth of the Pacific has always been right there, it would always be. It was an undeniable thing, and the idea that someone had never seen it could barely wrap their heads around it in a material way blew most people's minds. In fact, some people even accused me of lying. I was an accuser too. Visitors to the incredibly isolated town I grew up in the outback would tell me about the beach, about how you could look out to the horizon, and how even if you had the most expensive pair of binoculars money could buy you wouldn't be able to see to the end of it. When I was young I simply didn't think this was true. Even as I aged and learned about geography, watched movies and looked at pictures I never really got it. Not until my third day in Perth, when I stood on a perfect white sand beach and stared across the horizon and saw, well, nothing. I'm telling you this because it taught me that something can be utterly mundane to a person. To many people, even, and at the same time be miraculous, mysterious, even unbelievable, to someone else. Normal is relative, and people don't believe what they don't know. One of these instances is why I'm writing this now. It started with a casual conversation between me and a couple of uni mates. Asher, the first friend I had made when I moved to the city, had pointed out a big black texto scribble that ran down the inside of my forearm. "Why have you always got shit drawn on you? Are you thinking about getting a tattoo?" he had asked, cracking open the first of what would become many beers on that particular afternoon. "It's just an old habit," I had said. "We used to have to do it back home because we had a gray skin. I guess I'm just used to doing it now." "You had a what now?" Asher had paused, his beer halfway to his mouth. "A gray skin," I repeated. "Maybe you've got a different word for it. I know that the Aboriginal kids called it something else." "What's a gray skin? Is that some kind of disease?" Kelly, Asher's girlfriend, had asked. I had started to feel uncomfortable now. This was going to be another thing that city people weren't familiar with, like buying your fruit from a truck or needing to take 20 liters of water in a car with a massive rhubarb on it just to travel to the next town over. This was going to make me sound weird and different from everyone else, and I considered trying to pretend I was making a joke and changing the subject. Asher wasn't having it though. "Go on, what's a gray skin then?" I hesitated before admitting to myself that I never was a good liar, and went on to tell the truth. "It's like a person, but not really. You might think it was a person from a distance, but you can tell something's off when it gets closer. It's gray all over and its eyes are all clouded up, and if it likes the way your skin looks it takes you away. It likes to take skin that hasn't got sunspots and wrinkles and scars, but it normally won't bother with you if you're dirty or you've got stuff all over you. That's why you draw on your arms or legs, so if a gray skin comes by it won't get you." Kelly laughed. "It's a bit early in the day for ghost stories, I reckon." "That's a pretty good one though. Was that just a local thing?" I was confused now. "It isn't a ghost story, not a myth like vampires or yowies or anything. It was just a thing you had to be careful about." Asher and Kelly were looking back at me like I just stripped off and started doing the hokey pokey. "Asher, I don't mean to be an asshole or anything, but you know that can't possibly be true, right? This isn't something you believe anymore, is it? Is this like a religious thing?" Now it was my turn to give them the naked hokey pokey stare, because of course grayskins are a thing. Not a pleasant thing, but a widely accepted fact of life. Snakes are scary and dangerous and probably fairly uncommon in the city too, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. Of course I believe in them. I've seen one. Heaps of people I know have seen one. Asher let out a cough that was an obvious and half-hearted attempt to hide a brief eruption of laughter. All right then, tell us about the grayskin. So I told them about my first, and only proper encounter with a grayskin. I'll recount it here again because although my friends still don't believe a word of it, they've told me I should share a little of what I had always considered to be a fairly regular childhood as this encounter, and many others that I've since shared with them, apparently aren't normal at all. The town that I grew up in had a population of a little under 300. Town might have even been too generous of a word. The town center comprised of a general store, petrol station, mechanic, a small doctor's office, a crumbling and rarely used town hall, a scattering of houses, a pavilion where the weekend markets and odd rodeo were held, a massive shed that sold and repaired farming equipment, and the town's tavern, a double-story, Federation-era building owned by my parents. A single gravel road cut a monochromatic slash through the center and disappeared over the horizon, funneling road trains and red dirt-crusted utes from one side of the middle of nowhere to the other. Spiraling out from the town was a vast string of farms, and further out, cattle stations the size of small countries. Some of the station staff lived in the town, but most stayed on the properties and rarely ventured beyond its borders. The majority of the town's inhabitants were people from the wheat and barley farms, and people who worked in the town itself. Everyone knew one another, and visitors were rare. I spent most of my time kicking around the closest farms with my friends. On hot days, we would ride our bikes to Chloe Brown's family farm, to the paddock with the biggest dam. We would strip down and splash around in the cold, muddy water and float around in inner tubes for hours at a time. It was on one of these days that I met the grayskin. The sun was starting to set and the other kids had headed home after a long day of swimming and throwing dirt clods at each other in the baking 45-degree heat. I had wanted to float a little longer. I knew that if I was quick on my bike I could spend another 10 minutes lounging in the inner tube and still make it home in time before it was dark. I don't know where it came from. The paddocks all around me were flat and sparse, so when I caught sight of the shuffling silhouette I was caught by surprise. I couldn't make it out at first. I thought it might be Chloe's dad coming by to check up on me. But as the thing moved out of the direct path of the glaring sunset it became very clear that it was something else entirely. It was tall, taller than any man I had seen before. It had no hair on its head or body, only papery, stone-colored skin. It moved quickly, deliberately, not quite running but taking long and forceful steps, like a power walker. Before I had really made sense of what was happening it was at the water's edge. My brain was moving as slowly as my body was through the cloudy water. I had been floating closely to bank of the dam, and hesitated before standing up. The thing was now less than 4 meters from me. I, standing with my feet sinking into the muddy earth below me, water up to my ankles, shivering under the darkening sky with only a pair of Ninja Turtles jocks to keep me warm. It now peering at me with interest, milky eyes staring unblinkingly. Its jaw hung slack. A strange noise had started to escape it, somewhere between the sound you make when you clear your throat, and the sound of air escaping a gas bottle. The sound dragged on and on, rising in volume as the grayskin began to move again. It did not walk forward this time. Instead, it moved in a way that I had seen many times in my short life, living in a wild place. The long, gnarled fingers spread out from its palms. It squared its bare and ash-covered feet. Its weight shifted noticeably downward, its head tilted toward me. Anyone who ever owned a cat, that had seen a fox stalking a sheep, that had watched a cobra mold itself into a tense spring in a nature documentary knows this stance. It was the anticipatory shape of a predator that was about to attack. My mind worked too slowly. I was frozen in place for half a second too long. A breath before my brain finally kicked into gear with run. Hide. Swim back into the center of the dam, you dopey gala. Grab some mud and rub it over your skin. Do something. The grayskin was on me. Its long, clawed hands were hooked around my shoulders. The thing towered over me, taller by a meter at least. The hanging jaw descended down, its ashy neck curling toward me. An audible cracking accompanied the slow and unnatural movement. Its hot breath hot on my face smelled terrible, like the abattoir on a hot afternoon. It smelled like blood and shit and death. I was frozen. On some primal level I knew that if I moved an inch that it would kill me. Those long sharp fingers would dig into my back and tear me in half. Its wide mouth would open even wider and its sharp yellow teeth would rip my throat out. Its long and filthy feet would slice into my bare stomach and pull my intestines out like tape from an old cassette. The grayskin continued to make its creaking, hissing sound. I felt the sensation of its dry hands moving down my shoulders. I felt it tighten its grip around my left wrist. Its cloudy eyes surveyed my skin as it stooped down further. It brought its hairless gray head so close to my forearm that I felt its horribly scaly skin graze against my own. Pieces dislodged, fluttering off into the wind like flakes of burnt-up paper. I was dead. Cold, crippling fear made my stomach clench. I closed my eyes, tensing every muscle against what I knew was to come. The pitchy, crackling gargle from its throat continued on, getting louder and more threatening, echoing in my brain and becoming unbearable. And then suddenly, it stopped. I cautiously opened my eyes. The grayskin was still in front of me. It still held my left wrist in its hand, now high above my head, hot in the late afternoon sun. The light had caught the shiny, new skin of a small scar that ran down the inside of my elbow. It was less than a year old, little and discreet enough to go unnoticed most of the time. Not now though. The grayskin's gaze had fixed unwaveringly on the tiny, unassuming patch of pale scar tissue. It gripped my wrist even harder, yanking my arm to examine my inner elbow even more closely. It remained silent for a moment more, before letting out a cry, a howl of anger and frustration. The clawed hand let go of my wrist like it was toxic waste. I fell back in shock, ass first into the ankle-deep water. The rest of me followed. Soon I was on my back in the silt and mud of the dam, looking up at the blue sky above me. Through the bubbles and sediment I could make out the silhouette of the grayskin standing over my prone body. It looked down at me for a movement, still semi-crouching and heaving with rage. I struggled through the sticky, dark mud to try and move away, and as I did more earth moved around me, clouding the water and obscuring my vision completely. I scooted back a little way, probably not far at all, but every centimeter felt like a victory as I wriggled away from the horrifying thing that stood over me. The mud cleared. The grayskin was gone. I sat up in the shallow pool, gasping for air and coughing up dirty-tasting dam water. I looked around, my vision scanning the acres of flat paddocks all around me. I saw nothing. It had disintegrated into the land as quickly as it had appeared. All that was left of it were a few gray flakes of the thin, paper bark-like skin floating on the surface of the water, drifting away from me and into the center of the dam. I rowed home as fast as I could. I hadn't bothered to get dressed and must have been a sight for anyone who saw me practically naked and face red and wet with tears. My mum tutted when I got home. I had got back after sunset and left my good shorts and my backpack at the dam, tracked water through the kitchen and made an awful fuss. When I told her about the grayskin, she tutted again, retrieving a permanent marker from the study and drawing a mark on arm similar to the one she had drawn on her own. I was lectured on the importance of making sure it didn't wash off when I swam, and told that I would be spending my free time tomorrow morning riding back to the dam to get my things. After that, I was very careful to make sure I followed Mum's rules when it came to staying safe. It really was common sense, and I certainly learnt the dangers of being careless the hard way, which is why even now, so far from the kind of place where you would find a grayskin, I still take precautions. It might seem a bit silly to do it in a big city, but I'd rather be safe than sorry, and it certainly can't hurt to be cautious. I told as much as I've said here to Asher and Kelly. They thought it was ridiculous, and maybe you will too. But this was just life where I grew up, and really, grayskins are nothing compared to some of the other things that go hand in hand with living in the outback. I've since told them about some of the other stuff that happened in my town, growing up. They both think I should talk about it here. I don't know how much of that is for their own entertainment, but I'm happy to share. Maybe someone out there had a childhood like mine, maybe they can back me up. And if you haven't, well, this story has just been a drop in a very big, Pacific-sized bucket. Maybe it's time for you to see the ocean.